Hello game fans and welcome to another interview at Game Anglia. Now today I've got the amazing Rhianna Pratchett, famous for Tomb Raider, Mirror's Edge and so many more. Thank you very much for coming here and having a talk with us and then doing a talk and then coming into this fully lit hot little room. So the first thing I really wanted to ask you is, I know that one of your first computers was the ZX81, and so what games do you remember from those days, and which ones stick with you?
Well, from the ZX81, the first game I played was called Mazogs, and that I was 6, and all I really remember was it was a little pixelated man in a little pixelated maze with little pixelated kind of crabby creatures going around the maze chasing him, and apparently I was quite frightened of it first of all because it's the first game I'd ever seen, and then I realised the little pixelated man got a pixelated sword and could fight back against little crabby creatures, and then something stuck with me, that kind of sense of justice of being able to fight back, that enraptured me as a child. And then I went on to an Amstrad, and I think my father's hand-me-down Amstrad, and I used to play Head Over Heels, which is a big isometric adventure game with two little characters called Mr. Heels, who could run very fast, and Mr. Head, who could fly or could float. And they started off in different places in the world, and you had to get them together. This is a sort of puzzle game. Get them together, and then Mr. Head would sit on Mr. Heels, and they could run and float at the same time. But the levels were vast and huge, and I think I only ever managed to complete one of them. They weren't levels like we think of levels now. They were massive levels. Egyptus was the only one I managed to complete. And then I can't remember what systems they were on, but I also play games like Alien Highway, Night Law, and then moving on to things like the Leisure Suit Larry games, King's Quest, Space Quest, all the quests.
This is when the story games
and Conquest of Camelot as well. It's a big favourite of mine. And also Monkey Island, of course, Day of the Tentacle, and Gabriel Knight, all sorts of things really. And then I play things like Doom as well.
Oh, excellent. And so nowadays, aside from writing for Tomb Raider, for Mirror's Edge, for Thief, for Bioshock Infinite, and all these sort of big AAA games, you've also done a number of comics and expanded universe stuff. So do you think that that games need more world building and more extended universe?
Well, I think a lot of what's great about games is their world building. That as a writer, you have to think beyond the scene, beyond the immediate characters. It is all about world building, and any writer will have so much stuff in their head that they've come up with during the development process that they won't be able to get into the game just because of time or budget constraints. That having something like a comic or a novel or DLC to kind of put it in can be a very cathartic experience. Certainly,
somebody gets to see it.
Yeah, in particular the Tomb Raider comics and Mirror's Edge to a certain degree, because I actually wrote the prequel to Mirror's Edge in the comics. So this was long before Catalyst sort of rebooted everything, but I was allowed to write the prequel story in the comics because I think they were originally going to do a sequel after the first Mirror's Edge, and said, oh yeah, it's fine for you to do the prequel. So I could do a lot of stuff in the comics that I would have liked to have done in the game had I'd been brought in earlier. So it was, that was very cathartic. Every comic has been sort of cathartic. And with the Tomb Raider ones I could get to be a little bit funnier than I could in the game, and there was less Eye of Sauron focused on the comic, so I could get away with a few more kind of fun, irreverent stuff.
And so you were giving Lara sort of more of a sense of humour, or the additional characters additional sense of humour?
More of a sense of humour, a little bit more towards classic Lara in some ways, but also kind of putting her in crazier scenarios, like dressed as one of the Bennett sisters from Pride and Prejudice fighting bad guys on the London Underground, which sadly I don't think is ever going to make it into a game. More's a pity, but that's the sort of thing I got away with in the comics.
Oh, fantastic! And so, working with game narratives, is there any sort of narrative techniques that you've employed or that you've seen that work particularly well in games?
Environmental storytelling, really. That's taken off in quite a big way over the last sort of 5 to 8 years. I think something like the first Bioshock is a masterclass in environmental storytelling. So environmental storytelling is used in every entertainment medium, but with games, the real estate for it is huge because the player is immersed in the world. They can look about it more or less as long as they want. It's not fleeting. It's not gone like environmental storytelling in a scene, for example. It's a little bit more like theatre, I guess, but a theatre that you can kind of poke around in the corners of. So Bioshock is a great example of how everything in the world can be used to support the story and fit in with the world building. So the level design, the mechanics, the art, the music, the mise en scène, the vending machines, everything sort of supports the narrative and the world. And prior to that, like Half-Life 2 and the episodes were doing some great environmental storytelling.
Sure.
And then you've got games that,
well.
that just almost entirely environmental storytelling, like Everybody's Gone to Rapture or Dear Esther, that are sort of utilising it purely. And I think that's something that games can do better than anyone else, and I think the industry is really starting to embrace that.
So that's a really important point then. So for the main audience for Game Anglia and for people who are going to watch this video, they're going to be new developers, they're going to be just starting out on their journey, and so it's vitally important to get a story or a narrative. Do you use a narrative paramedic or just a storyteller to?
Yeah, ideally you don't want a narrative paramedic because narrative paramedics are drafted in at the end when things are going wrong.
So they come in at the end. So that's important that you, if you're developing a game, if you've got your core mechanic, then suddenly call you in to say, right, now we need a story, and because the game is now going to evolve around this story.
Yeah, or ideally at the same time you're thinking of the mechanics, because the mechanics are going to inform the world and the character, and they're going to say something. So in all other entertainment mediums, we say action equals character. So you get to know a character by what they do rather than what they say. But in games development, what you do, therefore what is informing your character, is done by a completely different department that usually has nothing to do with narrative. But mechanics do tell you something about the character, but it's not necessarily what the story is telling you about the character. So trying to get those aligned, so having narrative people early on when you're coming up with those mechanics, and when you're coming up with the basis of the world can be very useful.
Excellent. And so you've written for one of the most, if not the most iconic character in gaming. Is there anybody that you've kind of got your eye on that you're thinking, who would I like to write for? If you could take somebody out of a game and say, right, let's give them their own story-based game, is there anyone that you'd like to write for?
I really like Alex in Half-Life 2, and particularly in Episode 1. I thought she was a great character. I really enjoyed Wolf Among Us as well, and as a franchise, that's one I'd love to work on. I don't know, that there were some really good secondary characters. Elaine Marley from the Monkey Island games is a great character, and there's lots of kind of fun historical female pirates you can draw upon. Obviously her name literally comes from a female pirate, an Irish female pirate. But I think those are probably Alex from Half-Life 2, because I think they played around with her character much more in the episodes, and that was kind of quite joyful to see. And I think she's got quite an interesting backstory.
And so, what do you think of the current crop of characters, that, especially in sort of 2017? Because we've seen all the characters from Overwatch, with strong female leads. We've had Horizon Zero Dawn, all coming out with additional strong characters. Do you think they're telling good stories? Do you think it's they're written well?
Well, I haven't played Horizon Zero Dawn yet. I'm waiting for my Christmas break, so I think I can get lots of games played. But I hear good things about it, and I like the sound of the kind of matriarchal structure that they've got in the game. and some of the themes that they're drawing upon sound very interesting. So I'm looking forward to playing that, and I think that's been one of the sort of strongest game narratives and female protagonists that we've seen for a long time. I'm quite interested in seeing what Naughty Dog do with The Last of Us Part 2, and more Ellie is always a good thing.
Yeah.
And it was interesting around that time when Last of Us came out, we started getting some very interesting secondary female characters like Ellie, like Elizabeth, and seeing more franchises that kind of boost up their female characters and make them proper characters in their own right, and not just there to prop up the male protagonist in his story. So I think we are getting better at how we treat our female characters and kind of giving them more important roles in the world.
Fantastic. And so I mentioned earlier, I sort of stumbled over the fact that the narrative paramedic, it's on your website, and you've said it before in terms of people bring you in too late. So with an audience of new developers and new studios all cropping up, what advice could you give to these game developers about taking on board writers at an early stage, and what advice would you give to game developers based on having worked with AAA studios and indie developers as well?
I mean, the earlier that you can get writers involved, the better. And that doesn't mean that you have to have them there the entire time. Writers can be sort of, contracted for even just a few days of brainstorming, or just giving feedback of documents, and then they can kind of go away while you sort of cogitate on that, and kind of come in and go away again. And that's kind of what you tend to do anyway during the development of a game. But what writers do isn't just the word bits, and I think the word writer just conjures up, writers do the word bits, writers write the words. We'll put the words in later. But what writers do so much of in games is the world building, is a lot of invisible work behind the scenes, helping pull everything together and make it make sense. And writing is often seen as something that's cheap and easy. And it's cheaper to change a line than it is to kind of change a piece of art, or a piece of code, or virtually anything else in the game. But it pulls all the expensive bits together. It glues all the expensive bits together. Therefore, it's kind of got its tentacles into everything. Therefore, it kind of needs to hold together properly. And likewise, everything in the game informs the narrative in some way. So the art, the music, the animation, the mechanics, as I mentioned earlier, they all tell you something about the world and the story and how, and your characters and the other characters and how you're moving through it. They give the world context and meaning. So you need someone there kind of keeping an eye on everything and seeing that everything is sort of supporting the same kind of, the same story, that's all working together in the sort of Bioshock way. So getting someone that understands world building, has a kind of understands how mechanics can have meaning, and can talk to people about, okay, what emotion are you trying to draw out of a player, and how the mechanics are going to make a player feel something. I always point to Papers, Please, for example. It's, as we've been talking about, the mechanics are designed to make you feel guilty and paranoid and stressed, and it's all it's virtually all done with the mechanics, and then little bits of storytelling folded in.
The better you get the game, the more upsetting it almost becomes.
And that when you can get your mechanics working to support the theme of the story, I think that's when games are at their best.
Yeah, I remember playing the latest Fallout and going into sort of a mansion house and seeing the skeletons of a family all huddled on a sofa in the front room, and it was like, that didn't need to be there, but it was just it just gave this single house just so much backstory, and it was almost like you wanted to explore the house even more, just because something had happened here and there was a story there. It didn't have to be there, and I think it was just having somebody on hand to say, this is the story behind this. This is why you're in this house, and it just engages the player lots more. And so one of my last questions then. Is, I've been asking everybody this. So picture the scene. So you've just finished college, university. You're just about to take your first steps into the wide world of gaming and game writing and narrative. And all of a sudden, you pop through a time hole. You meet yourself, and you've got a couple of minutes to give her some advice before you go back. What kind of things would you say to young Rhianna?
Nothing is ever as bad as it seems in the moment when it seems terrible. It will be okay. Sometimes the things that are really bad actually will lead on to something good. So sometimes your most difficult projects will lead on to your much better ones. Because for me, Thief was a very difficult project. But if I hadn't have done Thief, I probably wouldn't have done Tomb Raider, because I was recommended by the producer on Thief to the producer of Tomb Raider. So, and even when things go wrong, they can tell you, you learn from that, you learn from your mistakes. So not fearing your mistakes, being okay with them, that they will be as much of a learning experience as your successes. It's all about the people. It's all about the people you surround yourself with. So make sure you choose good teams. You choose people you think you're going to be working with well, because you're going to be working with them for a long time. Get more sleep, pet more animals, eat more chocolate, exercise more. I think it's all good advice. But yeah, don't sweat the little things is always good advice.
Oh, that's excellent. Well, thank you so much for not only doing the talk at Game Anglia, for coming here as well. And yeah, absolutely thank you. It's been fascinating.
Thank you for having me.
And if this video has been useful, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, like, subscribe, and we'll be back with another interview very soon.